Welcome to Does It Matter by Brainy Ballers, where we dissect the game with cutting-edge analytics to give you the upper hand. We analyze everything from hand sizes to average depth of targets to uncover hidden trends that no one else sees. Say goodbye to guesswork and hello to data-driven domination. Because here at Brainy Ballers, we don't just watch the game, we understand it. So get ready, it's podcast time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. For years, fantasy football managers, myself included, have really wrestled with the tight end position. It often feels like just a complete lottery, right? Like, is there really a reliable way to get an edge? Or are we all just kind of throwing darts in the dark every season? Well, today, we're diving into a really intriguing question based on your sources. Does a tight end's draft capital, basically, does that help predict future fantasy success? We've looked into this analytical series, covering the top 50 PPR fantasy finishers all the way back to 2003. Our mission here is to pull out some crucial, actionable insights for you to help your decision-making. But, always remembering this isn't the only thing that matters.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating about this particular deep dive, I think, is the methodology they used. They specifically focused only on players from the top 50 fantasy finishers each year. The idea was to avoid skewing the data with those, fringe roster guys who might barely see the field. So this approach, it lets us compare the actual best performing tight ends against the lower end of the starters, giving us a much clearer picture.
Right, cleaner data. So with that solid method in place, let's get into it. What did the initial averages tell you when you grouped these players by how well they finished in fantasy? Did a clear pattern jump out about their draft capital?
Oh, absolutely. It was remarkably consistent, actually. We found that lower draft picks, meaning the players drafted earlier, typically correlated with significantly higher fantasy scores. To give you a stat on that, in 20 out of the 21 seasons we looked at, the guys finishing in the top 5 for tight ends, they had substantially lower draft capital, so earlier picks, compared to the tight ends finishing down in that 31st to 50th range.
Wow, 20 out of 21 years.
Yeah. It really suggests a direct and I'd say pretty powerful link between drafting a tight end early in the NFL draft and then seeing better fantasy production later.
That's compelling right off the bat. But, the real holy grail in fantasy is finding that specific sweet spot, isn't it? Is there an exact threshold? Did the study pinpoint a draft capital range where you really start to see the difference?
We definitely looked for that. And yes.
Do you want to start dominating your drafts? At BrainyBallers.com, we've researched every metric under the sun for you to find which ones are best linked to fantasy points. You can access hundreds of metrics to sharpen your scouting ability so you know which metrics matter and which are just noise. Stop guessing on which thresholds to look for within each metric. Big numbers can be misleading or irrelevant. Our Ultimate Athlete Blueprints reveal essential scouting metrics, their importance and benchmarks within each metric that help predict a player's probability of being a success or bust. Elevate your scouting ability with Brainy Ballers' Ultimate Athlete Blueprints today. Click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
Our analysis involved creating a differences chart. We compared each draft pick slot plus the next 20 picks overall to see where the biggest jump was. And it verified this really remarkable finding. A draft position of 115th overall and below, so picked at 115 or earlier, that seems to be the highest producing range for tight ends.
115. That's specific.
Yeah. This range specifically resulted in, 34.9% higher rate of finishing in the top 10 compared to the bottom 10 finishers.
Wow.
So if you're hunting for that optimal range, that 115th overall pick or earlier, that looks like your magic number zone.
That is incredibly specific and, frankly, super useful. But, okay, how strong is this connection statistically? Did you, run the numbers to see if it holds up, or is it more of a general guideline?
Oh, it's much more than a guideline. It's statistically pretty robust. We used Pearson correlation, and it came back with a negative 0.270 value.
Okay, Pearson correlation. Negative 0.270. Remind us what that means again. Negative is.
Right. So a negative correlation just means as one thing goes up, the other tends to go down. In this case, as the draft pick number gets higher, meaning a later pick, the fantasy success tends to decrease. And the closer that number gets to -1, the stronger that inverse relationship is. So negative 0.270, that's considered a pretty strong signal in this context.
That is fascinating. So negative 0.270, that's a strong inverse link.
Mm-hmm.
How does that stack up against, say, other things we know matter, when scouting prospects?
That's a really good question to ask. Think about something everyone agrees matters, like quarterback draft capital, right?
Sure.
When you run the same Pearson correlation analysis for QBs and their fantasy success, that value is negative 0.219.
Huh. So lower than for tight ends.
Exactly, which raises this really interesting point, doesn't it? If you connect the dots, it suggests that tight end draft capital might actually be more strongly correlated to future fantasy success than even QB draft capital is. It kind of hints that maybe NFL teams themselves, through where they spend their draft picks, are sort of telegraphing who they believe in most, who's likely going to get the opportunity, the coaching focus, maybe a longer leash to develop. All things that help fantasy value.
That is a strong claim. And I can almost hear listeners thinking, okay, but what about the late round guy who broke out? The outlier. Does the data account for those? Or is it really about playing the probabilities here? And has this trend stayed consistent over time? The game changes, right?
Yeah, great points. Look, outliers always exist in fantasy, but the whole point of this kind of deep dive is to find that reliable edge, the trend that helps you play the probabilities more effectively over the long run. And yes, we did look at decadal differences. And while maybe the significance of that optimal range has lessened just slightly in the most recent years, it still remains a strong, very consistent, and I think highly valuable trend for evaluating tight ends. It's held up well.
Okay, so let's bring it home for everyone listening. What does this all mean for your fantasy football strategy? Like, picture this. You're on the clock, maybe it's around 9, and you've got 2 tight ends scaring you down on the draft board. How does this data immediately change how you think?
Right. Well, what this deep dive has really uncovered is this powerful statistically backed threshold. You should probably prioritize tight ends drafted at or earlier than that 115th overall pick. It's not just some random number. It feels like a pivotal edge. It suggests that if you're genuinely torn between 2 guys in those middle rounds, say, one was picked 80th overall in the NFL draft and the other was picked 150th, well, this study gives you a pretty clear, data-driven tiebreaker. You're essentially betting on the NFL team's conviction shown through draft capital, not just your gut feeling.
That really does give us a powerful new lens, doesn't it? For looking at tight end strategy in the next draft. It's a compelling nugget of knowledge, maybe even a shortcut to being better informed. What really stands out to you about how this changes the perspective on scouting these guys? Maybe who you target in those crucial middle rounds?